We'll go ahead and get started. I want to welcome everyone to the Aero Spring Virtual Conference. My name is Tom Veit. I am filling in today for Joe Eibach. Joe is under the weather. Joe, we hope you get feeling better. And Joe wanted to say hello to everybody. We want to thank our sponsors today. At the platinum level is Riva. The gold sponsors in alphabetical order are the American Society of Farm Managers and Rural Appraisers, the Appraisal Institute, Clear Capital, the National Association of Realtors, Service First, Service Link, and Solidify. Once again, thank you, sponsors, for making this possible. And we're very appreciative of your efforts there. We have one announcement today. We have to sign in for each session today, tomorrow, and Wednesday. Tomorrow's breakout sessions, they are all open sessions, except for the attorney session and the investigator session. So if you fall into either one of those categories, email Brandy March and she will send you the invite for either the attorney session or the investigator session. I am very proud of Aero's leadership and membership. We are still thriving through COVID, which is a great accomplishment. I want to thank everyone. We have a great team. We have a great membership. Thank you. We continue to keep striving as well. I would like to personally thank the program committee and managing director, Brandy March, for everyone's hard work, for putting this conference on. I also want to thank Jill Ewing with the coordinating group. She's done a great job. She's in charge of all this technology. She's also the glue that keeps this place together for this conference. So we have a 3-day event that this conference is. And you might ask yourself, why is it important to join all 3 days for all the sessions? For one, it's important to stay connected. 2, we're going to have some major challenges like we've had in the past. We're going to have them in the future. And working together, we can solve all those problems. In Joe Eibach's words, we need to stay connected, stay in touch, and be true to the profession. This concludes the opening remarks. I hope everyone enjoys the conference and look forward to seeing you guys on the next session. So everyone sign in for the next session. Thank you, everybody.
Well, actually, this is the same link to the next session. So
oh, it is. Okay, good. All right.
So just stay
so we're
on.
Here. We're on here then. Great.
All right. Well, I guess that means we're going to get started a little bit early today. So welcome to the first session. This should be recording. So if not, Jill, could you make sure that's started? All attendees except for the panel members will be muted during the presentation. We ask that questions from attendees be held until after all speaker presentations have been completed. There should be ample time to ask questions at the end. There are 2 ways to ask a question. You can raise your hand virtually, or you can request it through the chat box. And if you aren't already aware, you are entering into the Appraisal Foundation Board up session. You'll hear from President of the Appraisal Foundation, Dave Button, Chair of the Appraisal Standard Board, Wade Miller, and Vice Chair of the Appraiser Qualifications Board, Mark Lewis. Their biographies were handed out with the conference materials, and they can also be found on the Aero website under the events page. So please help me welcoming our distinguished panel members, starting with Dave Button. And I will get the slide going real quick.
Well, thank you all for having us. Thank you, Brandy. Thank you, Tom. And thank you to the Aero Program Committee for including the foundation and board update as part of your program. We've been doing this historically for a long time, and we appreciate this interaction with the state regulators. So if you want to go ahead and click to the next slide, Brandy, and then the next one. So communications, a year ago this month, we hired a director of communications, Amy Timmerman, and she's doing outstanding work. We have a monthly newsletter that goes now out to over 62,000 people. In fact, an edition came out this morning. The other thing that I'm quite excited about is a weekly podcast. Last month, we started doing a podcast that comes out every Monday, 5 to 10 minutes in length. It's called Appraiser Talk. What's nice is it's very timely and very concise. Something could have occurred just within a few days, and we're able to address that in this podcast. You can sign up for it through Spotify, through Apple Podcasts, through Google Play. And what's also nice is all of these podcasts are archived on our website with the title, what the topic is, and they're categorized. So over time, there's a fair amount of body of knowledge that's going to be on the website, and we encourage you all to sign up for it. It's been very well received. We've had, I think, 2,000 people sign up for it. We're also doing more webinars. A year ago, the ASB and AQB said we're going to do webinars in conjunction with our exposure drafts. We're doing more informational webinars. And then live streaming all of our meetings. Last Friday, the AQB had a public meeting. We had 350 registrants there. And now that we're very comfortable in using this Zoom platform, we allow Q&A as well. So it's much more interactive. We'll probably be doing these virtual meetings even after the pandemic is behind us. It just seems to be a great way to reach as many people as possible. And then lastly, we're doing a greater use of social media. That's worked out fairly well. Appraiser population is not very big on Twitter, but it has some presence on Facebook. So we're using that as well. Next slide, Brandy.
Sorry.
It's okay. A couple things about outreach efforts that we're doing. We have a special committee on diversity, equity, and inclusion. We formed that a little over a year ago, February of last year. We're both looking internally and externally about this whole issue of diversity and inclusion. What we did starting last fall is we asked the ASB to take a look at USPAP and anything related to fair housing. I think Wayne's going to talk about that in a few minutes. We also asked the AQB to look at the qualification criteria and the 7-hour USPAP course and incorporate more things regarding this topic as well. Mark's going to talk about that. And we're also, as far as the composition of our ASB, AQB, and Board of Trustees, we're doing more to seek out a diverse applicant pool. Right now, we are actually interviewing people for 4 vacancies on our Board of Trustees. It's one of the more diverse, both looking at race and gender, pools of applicants that we've had in some time. We also have a special committee on veterans. It's actually chaired by Pete Fontana. Many of you know he's a colleague of yours. He chairs the Montana Board. He also serves on the Arrow Board of Directors. It's an excellent mentoring program. We have been able to identify appraisers who were in the armed forces, who are willing to talk to people who are considering a career in valuation. So what's happening is we have someone who's leaving the Marine Corps. We'll call up someone who was one of our mentors who was in the Marine Corps. And there's a discussion about the good, the bad, and the ugly about being an appraiser. And what's happened is it's kind of formed a relationship between the mentor and the prospective appraiser, so that anytime the trainee has a question, sort of a fork in the road, he goes back and talks to that mentor. It's not a supervising appraiser. It's more like a career coach or something like that. It's working out extremely well. We're also working with the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. They're putting together a pilot program, which is still in its infancy, about how we can get veterans to become essentially VA appraisers rather. It's working out well. We're always looking for mentors for both of these efforts. If you just email info@appraisalfoundation.org, info@appraisalfoundation.org, we'll get back to you and try to get you on board as a mentor for either one of these 2 projects. Next slide. One thing that I've been at the foundation a long time, one thing I'm pretty confident in saying, there's not a lot of demographic information about appraisers. There's a ton of anecdotal information, but not much. There's never been a census of appraisers or anything like that. And what we are doing, actually what we just concluded last Friday, is a national diversity survey. It went over to 70,000 recipients. And the genesis of this is, if we're going to try to measure success, how are we doing reaching out to veterans? How are we doing reaching out for diversity and inclusion? You need to have a baseline. So what this survey is going to do is we're going to get actual data on this, and then 3 or 4 years from now, we can do it again and just see what success, if any, we've realized. The results of this survey are going to be presented to our Board of Trustees meeting on May 21st. That's an open meeting. You can register on our website. And then we're also going to post a synopsis of this survey on our website as well. Next slide, please. So I've talked about this in the past, and I just want to update you. There's some news here. You know, back in December of 2019, we wrote a letter to the House Financial Services Committee Chair, Maxine Waters, and said, you know, 30 years has gone by with FREA, and we believe that what Congress intended versus how it's being implemented today, it's a world apart. Much to our pleasure, Maxine Waters pretty much took our letter to her and sent it to the GAO in February of 2020 to go ahead and proceed with a study. I should have mentioned this. The Government Accountability Office is the audit and investigative arm of Congress. As I say, February of 2020, she requested this. What happened in March 2020? The pandemic hit. Put it on the shelf. Well, now we've learned in the past month, it's now starting up again. They're doing some preliminary interviews. They're scheduling who they're going to talk to as far as major stakeholders. That will include many people that are on today's webinar as well. And what they're going to be looking at is what's happened since 1989. The regulatory carve-outs by the banking agencies, the state waiver, the North Dakota state waiver, evaluations. There were no evaluations in 1989. So Congress came up with this appraiser regulatory system, trained tens of thousands of appraisers to perform appraisals, and now there's this sort of parallel thing where you have evaluations and you don't need to be an appraiser. It kind of dilutes the whole focus of this, which was to protect the integrity of the deposit insurance fund. And then lastly, the whole threshold level was 50,000 and 100 and 250. Now it's 400,000. So the results are expected, as it says on the slide there, first, second quarter of next year. This is the third study of the appraiser regulatory system. They did one in 2003. They did one in 2012. We were active participants in both of those. These studies always include recommendations. How do we improve things? And those recommendations very often become the basis for the introduction of legislation. So we'll see what happens. I'm pretty confident by a year from now, May of next year, this will be out on the street and will be a topic of discussion among all of us here today. Next slide. All right. Corrective education. A few years ago, we surveyed all of you and said, what areas are appraisers having issues with regarding USPAP? We called it remedial education. We were told by all of you that corrective education is the better term. We developed those first 4 courses there. And then in the past year, we added 4 more, those at the bottom of the slide. We've had 600 people take these courses so far, not voluntarily, but because the states asked them to do so. You all are in the regulatory world. If you had a guess, which one of these courses people are getting assigned to the most? Scope of work is coming in at number 3. Residential report writing versus form filling is the second most requested course for disciplinary reasons, and coming in at number 1 in this week's countdown is appraiser self-protection, documentation, and record keeping. And that's far and away the most popular of all these corrective education courses. Next slide, Brandy. So there's a lot of as you all know, there's a lot of turnover among the state regulators. When every time we go to an ARROW conference, we ask for about first-time attendees, and about a third of the room raises their hand. So we just want to remind you that there are a lot of tools out there for you. We have a resource page just for state regulators on our website. Included there is a voluntary disciplinary matrix. It's updated with every edition of USPAP. It lists recommended disciplinary actions. It also lists mitigating and aggravating circumstances. It's a pretty handy tool. It's a little bit like federal sentencing guidelines. We also have a 4-hour course. Those of you that have board members, maybe they're a banker or a public member, and they're there deciding with USPAP related things. This is a 4-hour course developed for non-appraisers, and it's an introduction to USPAP terms and concepts. You can sign up for it on our website. And then Mark will talk much more detail than I will about these next two, but we have a course approval program that now, as of the past year, it's live, it's interactive, it has over 300 approved courses on it. You can click on them, find out a lot more information. And then the AQB College Degree Review Program, as Mark will report in a few minutes, it has grown exponentially in the last year or two. And that saves your trainees from you all having to go over the transcripts of your trainees if in fact they've already been reviewed by the AQB. Next slide, please. Mark's going to talk about PREA later on, practical applications of real estate appraisal. As you all know, that's that simulated training, which the AQB adopted, and it was effective January 1 of this year. This is what I'm telling you is a staff proposal at this time. It's going before our Board of Trustees later this month. But one of the things we're thinking about doing is providing financial assistance to develop PREA modules. We call this the first phase. We would probably identify up to 2 nonprofits. The for-profit world can kind of take care of itself. Up to 2 nonprofits with financial assistance of up to $500,000. Just to kind of, for those that are on the fence, they don't know if they want to do it or not, we're hoping that this might nudge them over the fence to actually develop a PREA module. Secondly, once these are out on the street, and we're convinced there will be, just a question of how many PREA modules will be on the street, we want to then provide scholarships for both evaluation education and the PREA registration with a focus on minorities, veterans, and rural residents as well. So we think that this has a lot of hope. We like the idea of giving back to the profession. We like the idea of sort of jump-starting, getting people into the profession, removing any impediments if, in fact, the fee for education or attending PREA is an issue. We hope to address that as well. That's my last slide, Brandy, but I do have another comment that I want to just briefly talk about. And that is bias and discrimination. It's all over the place. And it's in a, what we have is essentially a folder with a whole bunch of press clippings in it and a whole lot of draft legislation that's out there. But appraisers are all about data and metrics. And one thing we don't have is data and metrics. How many complaints have actually been filed with the states? How have they been adjudicated? How many, if any, have been referred to the Civil Rights Commission? We don't know any of that. We are going to encourage the appraisal subcommittee to either perform a survey of the states to get some of this data or make some modifications to their toll-free number. Dodd-Frank says that complaints that are referred to state appraisers, certifying and licensing agencies, or to federal regulators, the appraisal subcommittee shall have the authority to follow up such complaint referrals in order to determine the status of the resolution of the complaint. Well, they've opted not to exercise that authority, but it's already in Dodd-Frank, so they would just have to go ahead and do it. But I do think that we're operating kind of in a vacuum. Press stories, some of them are extremely disturbing, but again, it's the media. So I think we need some more just regular hard data, some hard metrics. And with that, Brandy, I appreciate having the time today to speak with your group. Thank you.
Well, Brandy, I'm not sure if you're going to introduce me or you just want me to take off from here. So I'll go ahead and jump right in. I'm Wayne Miller. I'm the chair of the Appraisal Standards Board. I believe you have my my resume, or at least what I wanted to tell you about myself. But before I report on the work of the ASB, I would like to acknowledge my hardworking board and also members of the Appraisal Foundation staff that support the work of the board. As practicing appraisers in many different facets of the profession, board members are often personally impacted by the issues facing appraisers today. That said, we have the unique responsibility to examine those issues and consider whether and how USPAP does, can, or should address those issues. If you will, please switch to the next slide. All righty. On March 1st of this year, the ASB released a first exposure draft of Advisory Opinion 16. It had a comment deadline of March 31st. And so the comments are in, but they keep coming. This advisory opinion deals with the topic of appraising properties that are subject to fair housing laws. And, as Dave just mentioned, the greater topic of fair housing has gained a lot of traction lately in the media. Appraisal is one facet of the greater mortgage lending process. Thus, appraiser qualifications, the appraisal body of knowledge, the appraisal process, and the appraisal standards have become part of the discussion. Now, the ethics rule clearly indicates that appraisals must be completed without bias. And one facet of the competency rule is the requirement that appraisers understand the laws and regulations that apply to each assignment. However, one aspect of the ethics rule has become an area of focus. Now, the ethics rule indicates that, and I'm quoting, an appraiser must not use or rely on unsupported conclusions relating to characteristics such as race, color, religion, national origin, gender, marital status, familial status, age, receipt of public assistance income, handicap, or an unsupported conclusion that homogeneity of such characteristics is necessary to maximize value. Many of the above demographic characteristics are covered by fair housing laws. And as the existing Advisory Opinion 16 explains, even supported conclusions regarding race, color, religion, national origin, gender, familial status, and disability cannot be considered by appraisers, or for that matter, by lenders or other real estate professionals. So the question has arisen, why not just get rid of the word unsupported in the ethics rule? Well, in some assignments that have nothing to do with fair housing, it may be appropriate for an appraiser to consider some of these demographic categories when they're completing an appraisal. We have a great and ethnically diverse country here. So an appraiser, let's say a commercial appraiser, who is valuing a shopping center that is anchored by an ethnic grocery store with a lease that expires in 6 or 9 months. The appraiser may consider that the likelihood of the tenant renewing is higher due to the concentration of the ethnic population in the trade area. Or consider an appraisal of a proposed house of worship. Certainly the concentration of members of that faith in the area might be a relevant factor when contemplating the feasibility of the construction of the property. The only other example I can give you at the moment is, consider a business appraiser who's valuing a company that makes and sells products specifically serving a racial or ethnic group. It certainly makes sense that that appraiser would study the population trends associated with that racial or ethnic group as an integral part of their valuation analysis. Now, that said, the ASB's goal is for USPAP to be understandable and enforceable. So the ASB will continue to consider the feedback we've received on this issue to determine whether to propose changes to USPAP. If we can make changes that enhance understandability, we'll certainly propose such changes and will expose them to stakeholders for comment. As a result of all of that, we're going to wait to issue a second exposure draft in the Advisory Opinion 16 until we study these weighty issues. Next slide, please. Okay, on to a lighter topic. On Friday, February 19th, the ASB extended the effective date of USPAP. With the stresses that have been placed on the entire system due to the pandemic, and the ASB's inability to meet in person as a board, and the inability to seek in-person feedback from stakeholders, including ARROW, the Appraisal Foundation boards and councils and others, the board felt that extending the effective date of USPAP by 12 months was the best course of action. And this will give the ASB time to examine the potential changes in light of current issues impacting the appraisal profession. So a logical question is, has this ever happened before, and what does this mean for you or the appraisers in your state? Next slide, please. So while an edition of USPAP has not been extended before, there has been a highly varied history of the effective dates of editions of USPAP. In the early years of USPAP, there was a loose leaf binder. I've heard Dave say it at many different meetings early on in the foundation. No two people tended to have the same exact version of USPAP because you were constantly snapping open 3-ring binders and putting in change pages. So it would be a miracle if two people even were close. But from 1992 to 2004, there were in fact annual bound editions. After that, there were a few 18-month cycles until 2008 when we moved to a 2-year cycle. Now the current cycle has been extended to 3 years due to the unique challenges brought on by the pandemic. Next slide, please. This slide notes that the requirement to take a 7-hour USPAP continuing education course every 2 years has actually been a requirement since 2003. It's coincidental, right now that we've had a marrying up of the 2-year effective date of USPAP and the 2-year requirement to take a CE course on ethics and standards. 2003, it was 5 years before USPAP went to this 2-year publication cycle. That said, though, probably the number one question I'll use the greater we, the TAF staff has certainly received this question a lot, as has Mark, is if I was due to take USPAP, next year, can I skip a year? The short answer is no. Mark Lewis will explain a bit more about how USPAP extension affects AQB initiatives, including the maintenance of the 2-year continuing education course cycle, which I know is embedded in most of your state laws. So then the logical follow-up question is, does this mean USPAP will now be on a 3-year publication schedule? And to be honest, this has yet to be determined. Next slide, please. As noted here, we have developed 14 Q&As since early 2020. I know I gave an update to this group last April, and we had just come out with a whole suite of Q&As about remote inspections. We have added some additional Q&As later on last year that involve data sharing. The titles are listed here. As we contemplate potential changes to USPAP for 2023, I will say that one of the issues we're studying in depth is the concept of assignment results. What are they? How are they defined? What should they be? Our anticipation is that we're going to be seeking feedback after we've done quite a bit of study on this matter. Next slide, please. I will say that since February, when we extended USPAP by a year, the ASB has been re-examining the issues that we had exposed as potential changes last year, and we've completed extensive research. We plan to issue a discussion draft later this month or early June to seek your feedback on the issues that we are studying. And finally, we plan to hold a virtual public meeting in late summer, likely July, at which time we'll have more information about our planned future exposure dates. Complete my report. I'm happy to answer any questions later on, and I'll turn it over to Mark.
All right, thanks, Wayne. Appreciate that, and appreciate all the work from the ASB. First off, I want to just say thank you for inviting me to this AERO meeting. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you. But I'd be remiss if I didn't thank my board, who has been extremely hardworking over the last year. That's Vice Chair John Ryan, Greg Harding, Brad Sweeney, Sean Telford, William Fall, Jerry Urick, and Byron Miller. And they're all doing just absolutely terrific work in all the activities of the AQB. Go ahead, Brandy. All right, let's kind of tag right along with Wayne's presentation there about the impact of the extension of USPAP and what it has to do with AQB. Go ahead, Randy. Short answer is, and Wayne gave you the kind of the time cycle of the historical USPAP class, but the short answer is that the 7-hour USPAP course requirement is not tied to the effective date of the actual USPAP document. The criteria, just simply states appraisers must successfully complete the 7-hour national USPAP update class every 2 years. So it's not tied directly to the actual cycle of USPAP. So none of that has changed. You're still going to need USPAP every 2 calendar years. So all that remains the same. Go ahead, Brandy, the next slide, please. So what has kind of gotten in the craw, I guess, of some appraisers is, well, why do I just want to take the same class twice? And the answer to it is it's not exactly the same class. As you can kind of see from this slide, there are, while there is a good amount of similarity, but item 3 here on your right is what is the objective of the new class that's coming out. And we will get a look at that around October. But the new course objectives for the upcoming class is to have students to be able to understand how to use the USPAP publication to solve their day-to-day problems. In other words, instead of just going through the substance in USPAP, the new 7-hour update is going to try to convey to the appraiser population of really how to use USPAP to solve their own issues and kind of be their own USPAP instructor, to put it a different way. But we're hopeful that the new class will actually be different and convey some new information to the appraiser population. Okay, let's go ahead to the next slide, please. Again, these we have Q&As that have been posted. They are found on the Appraisal Foundation website. And in relation to the extension of USPAP, there are specific information there that you can find. Essentially, the 15-hour USPAP class, there's no changes for it. So it's the same class because USPAP has not changed. But as mentioned, appraisers will need to successfully complete the 7-hour USPAP class or its equivalent every 2 calendar years. Now, we do have AQB certified USPAP instructors. And so there's been a question of, well, how does this extension impact those instructors? And all existing USPAP instructors have to go through a recertification course. We call it the IRC. The IRC will proceed just exactly as normal. And that will happen somewhere in 2022 as normal. So it's going to go on exactly as scheduled. I would also say that there is also a class for new instructors, and that class will be held at its normal cycle, and that will be toward the fall of 2022, and we will have that. Okay, Randy, go ahead. Next slide. All right, let's kind of get into the meat of the criteria and other AQB activities. Next slide, please. The AQB has issued, I believe, 6 Q&As that are on the website, and I'm seeing a chat by the way from Wayne down here at the bottom, and he's correct about the IRC. It is going to happen later on this year to get ready for next year. I misspoke. Sorry about that, Wayne. Wayne does a really good job of keeping me in line. Generally, that's Joe Ellen and Aida keeping me in line, but Wayne's here to take care of that for me. All right, but Q&As, I believe we've issued 6 Q&As actually on our website, and you're welcome to view those. They are available there. They refer to the required core curriculum education, the photo ID requirements under the current recommendation to ASC during the COVID issue, where we converted a lot of our classroom offerings, our live classroom offerings, over to synchronous delivery. Then there was some question about QE exams offered synchronously. How can you do that? That Q&A is out there. There was some more information there about synchronous and classroom offerings. And then there was some definition about what exactly is college level courses. And all those questions can be found with the answers on the Fraser Foundation website. I'll say, okay, Brandy, let's go on into the actual exposure draft that we have out. We're going to kind of delve into some issues here. The exposure draft has been out. We had our AQB work session Thursday, and we had a public meeting Friday of last week. And so the comments have ended on those. But I want to kind of give you just a quick, brief overview of what's in that exposure draft, and then we're going to talk about what may be upcoming here in just a little bit. But essentially, the exposure draft covered 3 issues. The proposed revision to distance education issues, and some additions to the criteria surrounding continuing education and qualifying education, specifically as it relates to fair housing issues. And then there was a proposal regarding some information appraisal experience. And we're going to talk a bit about that here in just a second. So Randy, let's go ahead and go to the next slide. All right. The information that you see here that is underlined and in gray is the addition or the proposed addition to the criteria as it relates to distance education. And the only thing that we have done here is attempt to define some areas of synchronous, asynchronous, and then that odd thing of hybrid courses, which is some kind of mix between live in class, a synchronous and asynchronous. And go ahead, Brandy. This well, I'll tell you what. Let me just stay right here just a second and just kind of let you know what may be coming in just a little bit regarding this distance education. We did get some feedback regarding this, and it seems like we need to tweak this just a little. And so, as I'll speak a little bit more here in just a minute about what's coming, I would expect a second exposure draft to be released here in the next few weeks regarding this further definition between synchronous and asynchronous classroom. And I'll speak to that more here in just a minute as we get to kind of things that are upcoming. But I would expect some tweaking of this exposure draft here in the next week or two. Okay, now you can keep going, Brandy. Sorry about that. All right. Of course, we have are keeping up and with the issues surrounding bias and fair housing and equal opportunity issues. We continue to get those stories that Dave talked about today. But we as AQB, it was our opinion that issues surrounding continuing education and in our qualifying education, we were of the opinion that those topics of fair housing and valuation bias, equal opportunity, were already in as acceptable continuing education topics and certainly should be covered under qualifying education. But just to kind of play belt and suspenders here, at the same time, we went ahead and put very plain language into the criteria, or proposing to do that, into our acceptable criteria regarding continuing education, to specifically say that those continuing education classes that surround evaluation, bias, fair housing, and/or equal opportunity are certainly acceptable topics for continuing education. So we just wanted to be doubly clear with that. And we insert the same type of language into the guide note 1 regarding qualifying education under basic appraisal principles. So that would be the first class that folks would be taking. That is certainly a topic of free game for those 2 areas. Okay, Brandy, let's go on to the next slide. Okay, this this item here that you're seeing on your screen has been the source of a lot of confusion amongst the appraiser population as we begin to get feedback. In the existing criteria, there is a section that already talks about a experience gained from a client in a non-traditional or non-business purpose setting. And the existing criteria said that you could get 50% of your experience from this non-traditional, non-business purpose assignment. The only thing that we did in this exposure draft essentially is to align this type of experience, or this on-ramp for experience, with the PAREA, which we adopted effective January 1 of this year. And we just removed the restriction of 50%, and that's it. And it seems like the perception from the appraiser population was, oh my God, we're getting rid of all field experience. Well, nothing can be further from the truth, because this item has been in the criteria for many years. And in fact, this is a section where, I call it the demo appraisal, but essentially, you would not have a lender as a client or some other type of traditional business purpose client, but maybe your client is yourself. Maybe your client is the whatever jurisdiction you're working in. The intended use may be for gaining experience credit, and the individual would go out and appraise their neighbor's house, their friend's house, their mother-in-law's house, whatever. But it is an appraisal. It just does not have a business purpose other than experience demonstration. The idea that a trainee would get all of their experience from this methodology is highly unlikely. But in some jurisdictions, we know this is being used to fill in some gaps of maybe some missing experience. And so it does have a good purpose. All we're doing here is bringing it in a line saying that if you can get up to 100% of your experience from PAREA, there's no reason why you can't get up to 100% of your experience from a non-traditional client setting. And that's all we changed, but it does seem to have stirred some folks up, and we kicked an anthill, I guess, but there's not a whole lot of change here in reality. There's also a section in the guide note that was related to practicum that we removed as not being terribly applicable. But again, practicum was a section in the criteria that's been there a long time, and nobody has ever used it. And it still remains unused. So the removal of the guide note that is shown here on your screen essentially has no impact on the criteria as it exists today. Okay, let's keep going, Brandy. let's talk about some other activities that the Appraiser Qualifications Board is working on. One is continually the National Uniform Licensing and Certification Exam. And of course, we get monthly statistics on that, and we keep up with monthly statistics. We keep up with primarily the number of test takers. We keep up with the pass rates of particularly first-time test takers, and we also keep up with repeat test takers and how they are being successful in retaking the exam if they were not successful the first time. As you can well expect, 2020 was an aberration. A lot of our testing centers were shut down. You couldn't take the exam. And so the number of test takers as expectedly dropped. But I'm glad to tell you the most recent information we have gotten seems to be that the number of test takers is back on a normal par. And so we are expecting that to increase as the year goes on, as these testing centers have reopened and folks began to get back into the system. The course approval program is running swimmingly well. As Dave said, we've got well over 300 courses that are approved, and we continue to review those. Those folks working in the CAP program are doing an excellent job in moving forward. Our real estate degree program is one that we are particularly proud of, and one that occupies a good amount of time at the Appraiser Qualifications Board, and one that all board members are involved with particularly. But our degree program review essentially goes into universities that have some type of real estate program. We evaluate those programs free of charge to the university. And essentially what we're trying to do is equate college level education with what's in the criteria as far as qualifying education requirements. And we see if we can give credit so those folks with a degree coming out of these universities don't have to start over at square one, but they can get a jump start. In some cases, they can get a jump start all the way through their qualifying education, depending on what's in their degree program. We are actively moving forward with this program and really working hard at it. I can announce to you that recently we have approved Fort Valley State, which is our first HBCU approved, which is a historically Black college and university. And that program has now been approved. We have approved Baruch College out of New York, which I believe is our first Hispanic serving institution to be approved. So we are very proud of those. We have several more that are in the pipeline, and I am hopeful that possibly within the next month or two, you're going to see more approvals come through as we work through those systems, and as we get cooperations with the universities. This is a area that we have really worked really hard with our diversity and inclusion efforts. And the folks at the foundation staff have been working very closely with AQB in identifying those universities that would be within the HBCUs or the women's universities, or folks that are in the Hispanic serving institutions, that we identify those universities, and we are making contact with them and doing our best to expose the appraisal profession to those universities. As well as all other universities, we are certainly moving forward, and I am looking forward to maybe the next time we meet, having 3 or 4 more universities that have been approved. So I'm very happy with that. All right, next slide, please. All right, as she's getting the next slide together, Another thing that, of course, we approved January the 1st of this year is PREA, our practical applications of real estate appraisal. I am pleased to tell you that there have been several states which have already adopted PREA in full, for full up to 100% experience. Some have adopted partially, and we're thankful for that. But we're looking forward to other states coming on board, taking a look at PREA, becoming more comfortable with the concept, and approving them up to 100%. And so that's we are looking forward to that. Brandy, you can go ahead and advance as I continue to blabber on here. But PREA provides that alternative to the traditional supervisor trainee model. And of course, I know you as regulators have heard and continue to hear from trainees saying, I just can't find a supervisor. I've called everybody on my side of the state. Nobody wants to sponsor me. And folks, that's a problem. It becomes a public problem if we can't move people through the system. And especially when they can't move through the system for a reason that is none of their creation. It's just an issue of the system that is holding them back. So we have not touched and are not touching the traditional supervisor trainee model. That model is still in place. When it works well, it works really well. And we would encourage folks, if you can link up with a supervisor who will impart to you their knowledge, do that. And we highly encourage that. But in those cases where that's not being feasibly done, then PREA provides an alternative to that. Now, I want to kind of make sure you understand that specifically PREA is not intended to provide competency. And this is kind of been an issue here that, there's nothing in the criteria now that says that we're coming out and we're going to make folks competent. Well, that's a USPAP issue. What we are doing is saying that folks need to be qualified to sit for their exam and pass their exam, and those folks are qualified to receive their credentialing. Competency is going to be acquired over time. And so that's, unfortunately, we have expected these trainees in year one, these baby trainees, to be as competent as we who have been in the appraisal profession over 30 plus years or longer have acquired over time, and that's just not going to be the case. Go ahead, Brandy, to the next slide. Thank you. But what we are proposing here and what we have adopted not proposing, but what we adopted in January is that for the licensed residential classification, PREA will provide the opportunity for up to 1,000 hours or 100% of that experience requirement will come through PREA, if that's the option that the trainee opts for. For certified residential, again, it can replace 100% of that 1,500 hour requirement for the traditional supervisor trainee model. But for the CG, there's some help there too. Remember, CG, you've got to have half of your credit hours in non-residential assignments. But PREA can provide that residential part of that, if that's the way the candidate elects to do. Go ahead and go to the next slide. PREA will require, if you look at what's in the guide note for PREA, there are touchstones there where at various places through the modules, there's going to have to be periodic mentoring. So there's going to be some interaction between those participants in those programs and a mentor. The folks that are completing these programs are going to have to complete USPAP compliant appraisals. We have been, we're leaving a great amount of latitude to the providers of PREA to develop exactly how those USPAP compliant appraisals are put together. But at some point, there's got to be a USPAP compliant appraisals and more than just one. And then once successfully completing PREA, the participants must still pass that national licensing or certification exam. So they're not finished with their program once they get past PREA. They still have to pass that exam, and just like everybody else does. Okay, so let me just kind of briefly walk through what to expect here in the near future. I think you should expect here within the next few weeks a second exposure draft, which will address the specific issues surrounding synchronous and asynchronous education. Based on the feedback that we got from the first exposure draft, I think what you're going to find out, and this is what we talked about in our work session, is that we're going to recognize that education delivered in a synchronous delivery format is essentially equivalent to a live classroom offering. And I think because we have gotten some experience over the last year with synchronous delivery, we've gotten comfortable with it. Providers have gotten really good about providing that. And so we're going to take advantage of that. So I would expect that to come out. And I also would expect us to propose to replace the prescriptive requirement that providers verify attendance with a photo ID for synchronous classes to exactly what is in the current criteria for live classroom attendance. And I know this, you kind of may have to chew on that for a second. At present, the criteria simply states that a class hour is 60 minutes, of which at least 50 minutes are instruction attended by the student. The responsibility of verifying a student attended is placed on the provider. And all providers need to have some kind of a policy regarding verification of attendance for both classroom or for classroom offerings. What we are going to propose is to say those providers need to have a policy for verifying attendance for synchronous delivery also in the same manner, whatever that is. But we're going to propose to shift that responsibility to the provider instead of being very prescriptive and saying you've got to show this photo ID in front of a camera. So that's going to be out. I would expect that to come out. It'll be out for public comment. So if you have specific comments as regulators, let us know. But that's I would expect that to come out here in the next week or two. Also, it's recently come to the attention of AQB that some of our jurisdictions are allowing students to sit for the credentialing exam by simply attesting that they have completed both education and experience. The issue that's come up is that students are passing the exam, and then subsequently the jurisdiction is verifying the appraisals qualify as experience. In other words, they appear to be selecting and reviewing appraisals, or regulatory officials appear to be selecting and reviewing appraisals from the candidate experience log after the candidate has passed the exam. In some cases, candidates who have successfully passed the licensing and certification exam are subsequently being told that their experience is inadequate, or in one way or another. But for all credentialing categories, the criteria states this. It states that there is a prerequisite for examination, and the prerequisite is completion of education and experience. This requirement has been in the criteria since about 2011. And as we discussed in our work session last week with the AQB, it's the position of AQB that the words prerequisite and completion should be interpreted to mean that qualifying jurisdictions must verify these prerequisite items be completed prior to examination. So to clear up any miscommunication that we've had this portion of the criteria, I would expect the AQB here in the next couple of weeks to issue for public comment an interpretation of the criteria that clearly states that education and experience must be completed and validated by the jurisdictions as a prerequisite to taking the AQB approved exam for credentialing. Now remember, an interpretation of the criteria is different from a simple FAQ. An interpretation is enforceable and has the weight of criteria. So your comments will be important to get back when we release that for public comment. One other item that I'd like to cover, and then I'll hush, is the level of experience review conducted by jurisdictions is extremely varied from one jurisdiction to another. Some jurisdictions do more of a cursory or sampling review of experience, and some jurisdictions perform what can be equated as an investigation of potential candidates, similar to what would be conducted for a disciplinary matter. Please remember, jurisdictions are making a determination if the candidate for credential is qualified to sit for the exam, not a candidate has met some arbitrary level of competency to sit for the exam. And so I just offer that as kind of informational of what we're seeing. And again, I'll be glad to take questions and comments.
Mark, this is Ernie Durbin. I don't know if you can hear me or not.
Yeah, I can hear you, Ernie.
So my question is just, I mean, I understand the rule, but I guess my question is, what is the thinking or the logic behind the mandate that the experience cannot come after the passing of the exam? I'm just wondering what the thought process is.
Well, I can tell you what the thought process was back in 2011 when that AQB board passed it and put it into the criteria. What they were finding is that folks were not being very successful until they completed their education. So this was, I mean, completed their education and experience. They were, at that time, you could do it in any order, and there wasn't any requirement. But the AQB board back in 2011 thought it was important enough that they put the prerequisite in there. Now, what's happening here that we've gotten stories here in the last several weeks here is that folks, we've got trainees that are coming through, they're passing they're turning in their logs. Some of the states are saying, well, y'all just sign a certificate or some kind of affidavit saying that, you've completed whatever hours that are required under the criteria. And then the state is issuing them a go to go take the exam. They're passing the exam. And then subsequent to that, the states are pulling reports and they are beginning to review those reports. And at that point in time, they become at the mercy of the board to tell them, well, you need to do 5 more appraisals. Instead of being qualified for a CR, we think you're better qualified for an LR. So how about you take an LR instead of a CR? That is not what AQB intended as a prerequisite. Essentially, what AQB is going to propose in this new interpretation is a prerequisite means exactly that. It means that experience has to be completed. States need to validate that prior to the exam. That way, when that individual passes that exam, essentially they're done. And the only responsibility left on the jurisdiction is to issue them their license or certificate. And what it does is it gets the board out of that very tenuous position of just seemingly arbitrarily adding layers on things that the candidate has to do to complete their
Understand.
process.
Yeah, I just my thought process behind it was that the exams are suitably challenging, and I like that aspect of the way they've been designed and seem to be very balanced at that. And so if you're going to pass that exam, you're going to have a lot of education. You're going to get a lot of knowledge base that you could then apply in your experience. But I don't want to take any more time. The only other question I have is that a foundation crack over your right shoulder there in that brick wall?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a crack in my wall, but
I got kicked off for a second, and it's probably when Mark said we were going to the question and answer period. Very sorry about that. So like you said, now's the time to ask questions. You can put them in the chat box, or you can raise your hand and I'll ask you to unmute. We have lots of time because we started early. So.
Hey, Brandy, I see a question in the chat box that's directed at AQB that asked if we have any theories on why the pass rate for the national exam may be declining in recent years. I can answer that shortly here, but the pass rate for the LR and the CR exam has been relatively stable. The pass rate for the CG exam did take a little dip here a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago. It took a little dip. We tried to do some investigation into the reason why, particularly the CG exam dropped a little bit, because the exam didn't change at all. It's the exact same exam. There's only a few other things that it could be, or it could be a combination of some things, but essentially we can't get that information to specifically pin down a reason why. All we can say is that the exam didn't change. And so there's only a few other things that it could be after that. But recently the CG exam has stabilized at that level and seems to be holding steady.
Okay. Jill, when I got kicked off, I lost. Oh, you made me co-host just now. Thanks. Okay. There's a message from Wayne Miller that answered Dennis's question. And did you get to the pass rates, Mark?
Yeah, the pass rates. I don't have them right in front of me, but pass rates for the residential exams are in the 60s, and for the CG exam, I believe it's in the upper 50s, low 60s, somewhere around in there. But again, it's stabilizing.
And were there any questions that came in before Wayne Miller's comment on 111? Because I didn't have access to it from them before.
Yeah, I got a direct question from Dennis Badger that I responded to in the chat box. I don't know whether Dennis wanted to ask that question live or not.
All right. Don't see any hands up right now.
There are two questions in the chat box there. I think they're both Marks.
Thanks.
Hey,
by the way, I'm looking up the pass rate specifically right now. Let's see here. Yep, I would say that.
So do you know if the USPAP instructor course will be virtual or in person?
I believe they're planning on virtual. I believe that's right, Dave. Is that right?
Yeah, it's a little early yet. I mean, that would be in the fall, October time. We did it last year virtually for the first time. It was pretty well received, but people liked the idea of talking with their colleagues, particularly after the course is over that evening when you do it in person. So if it's possible, I mean, we're sort of pandemic projecting here. If it's possible, we would do it in person.
Dave, IRC will be online again, right?
Correct.
Up to recertification.
Yes.
And depending on the comments for the second exposure draft, it sounds as though the AQB or the ASC extension through, or the TAF extension through 2021 for virtual qualifying and continuing education will be made permanent. Does that appear to be the outcome?
Yeah, just remember that the proposal that we're going to be coming out with regarding the exposure draft, that'll be coming in the future. And the current advice from our instructions from AQB, ASC down to the providers goes through the end of 2021. So any revision to that would happen after 2021 going forward.
And if the issue is certifying more appraisers, how come there's such a low pass rate?
Well, again, the exam hasn't changed, and that exam is a for the lack of a better term, it's the gatekeeper to make sure everything's done, and it's a practice-based exam that has been developed with practicing appraisers developing the exam. But our purpose is not to just put appraisers on the street. Our purpose is to put qualified appraisers on the street. And so they've got to pass that exam in order to do that. Now, I will tell you that coming up here in the next, maybe next month, our SMEs are going to be getting together, and they are going to be reworking the ratio of questions by topic. And that's been through, we got the survey results back from all the appraisers who have participated in what is your daily activity, what do you do? And so the exam will be redistributed based on that those survey results. And so you might see a little bit of tweaking of intensity of questions, maybe on the LR exam, maybe there's a little less income questions and a little more sales comparison questions. But I would expect some tweaking for the 2022 exam.
And just a point of information for those of you with us today, the AQB since 2008, when it first developed the national exam, they use an outside psychometric consultant. It's one of the biggest ones in the United States. They do all types of trades and professions, and they consult with us. And one thing they always say, and Mark already alluded to this, don't use the pass rate as some type of a gatekeeping type of thing. The exam should be what you need to know to be qualified. And frankly, the 55 to 65 range is pretty typical with the other clients that the psychometric consultant has.
Yep.
And there's one more question. What's the solution for finding supervisory appraisers for trainees, especially with a somewhat reduced burden under PIREA?
Well, I wish I had a solution for that, but I don't. Not without something else being involved way above my head at the congressional level. But under the current structure, it is very difficult to encourage people to be supervisors. And there's some structural issues there that go beyond the criteria and that are more at the congressional level. But there's some reasons for that. and they've been well documented over the years. But I wish I had a solution. I would love to marry every trainee with a highly qualified supervisor. But we all know, as being, you're in the regulating business, the disparity between quality of supervision from one trainee to another. It's not the same. Some are well trained and some are not so well. And we just know that's a problem. We're hoping Perea can bridge that gap and provide more consistent level of training and more broad-based level of training to our folks that are coming through the system.
2 points related to this topic. One is we surveyed supervising appraisers and specifically asked, would you be a supervising appraiser again? And if no, why no? And it's a problem. A lot of them don't want to do it anymore. The time, the effort, training your competition, that type of thing. On the other side, we now have over 500 people that are registered with us that want to take the Perea courses because they can't find a supervising appraiser. So we have this pent up demand that hopefully by the fourth quarter of this year, we can direct these people to a Perea provider.
We have another question. Is the licensed residential appraiser still a viable certification or license? And has the number of applicants dropped?
Yes, the number of applicants over the last few years, if you look at it, going back, say 3 years, 3 or 4 years, yes, the number of applicants have fallen off significantly. And that coincides with FHA's decision to move from LR being able to do FHA work to only CRs. So, I mean, that was kind of expected to have that fall off. But the good part of that is we've gotten more CRs coming in, more folks that are upgrading their license over to CR. So we're hoping that continues.
Regarding the FHA prohibition of licensed appraisers, I just got an email literally 2 hours ago from Senator John Thune, and they are going to introduce a bill that would allow licensed appraisers to once again perform FHA appraisals. That passed the House of Representatives last year. It didn't move in the Senate. So there's a good possibility that that'll happen. The number of licensed appraisers in 2007 was over 30,000, and today it's at 7,100. That's huge. And a lot of that is disproportionately in rural America.
Yeah, if that passes, if Senator Thune's proposal passes, that will have a direct impact on the number of applicants coming through for LR.
Mm-hmm.
Another question in the chat box is that supervisors are limited to 3 trainees, but trainees are not limited to the number of supervisors they may have. So would this possibly be a potential solution?
Certainly, any movement along that line will help. Again, supervisors limiting to 3 trainees. There are some wiggle room there, or there is some wiggle room there but the jurisdictions have to have a program that supports that. And I think the criteria is pretty flexible on what is a program, as in you need to have a program. So it's very widely open up for jurisdictions to allow that to happen. But the other way around, where trainees can have multiple supervisors, certainly if you can have more than one supervisor, great. That gives you more than one perspective to learn from. So I'm not sure how that's going to solve a whole lot of problems, being as we're having trouble getting supervisors to start with. And another kind of issue that I guess we'll talk about a little bit Wednesday in a session is that, folks, if you only allow partial experience for Perea and you don't allow up to 100%, we still have the problem with supervisors. Because if you only allow whatever the number is, 50%, 75%, whatever the number that you may select to approve, then they've still got to find a supervisor for the remaining part. So, again, these folks could go through a PREA program. A specific jurisdiction, let's say, only allows 50% of credit from PREA, and then they're stopped. So it's still going to be an issue if you don't allow up to 100%.
There is a message from John Dingman, who was curious about how many states would make it easier for a formal licensed residential appraiser to obtain their license as opposed to starting over with their qualifying education and hours. If you go to the chat box, if you're a state regulator and you click on John's name, you can reply to him directly, if you could do that, or maybe he'll share his email address and then you can respond to him. Another question is Don Rogers says the exposure draft seems to indicate that virtual courses will still have to have their delivery mechanisms approved by the Appraisal Foundation or another approved entity. Will there be a fee for this? And if so, how is it better than having to have an IDEC approval?
The first part of that I can answer. For asynchronous delivery, yes, AQB and others are allowed to approve that delivery mechanism, very similar to what's today. In regard to IDEC, IDEC can approve, or there can be others that approve. Now, as far as the foundation, what they would charge for that, that's above my head at the foundation level. But we are opening it up to others that can approve, particularly asynchronous delivery, which seems to be that's the problem child, is asynchronous. Synchronous, we are saying, is essentially equivalent to classroom, because we're basically doing synchronous delivery right now. So you're seeing me, you can talk to me, I can talk to you, it's live. And so that's synchronous. But asynchronous is a very fixed, you've got to complete it on your own. You're clicking through screens. So yes, there will be a delivery mechanism approval system there.
If the legislation passes allowing licensed residential appraisers to perform FHA appraisals, what type of outreach efforts are planned to not only reinstate those who gave up appraising previously, but to encourage new licensed residential appraisers to join the profession?
I'd have to give this a little thought, but one thing that comes to mind is the experience that they acquired for their existing LR. That doesn't expire, so they should be able to use that. The question would become, do they have to go in and fill in some CE that's missing, depending on how long they were out? So I would think that's probably going to be a regulating issue.
And as far as the public relations aspect of it, because we just learned about this today, obviously we don't have anything in place, but we would want to make sure that the whole marketplace is aware of the scope that a licensed appraiser can practice, and also the fact what the AQB did a couple of years ago, the different alternative paths once you have that licensed residential, how you can become certified.
Another question is, in your view, does an applicant's work experience need to meet the minimum requirements of USPAP? If so, how would you recommend a jurisdiction evaluate or review the applicant's work experience? And how would best practices differ from minimum requirements of USPAP?
Wayne, I don't know why I'm getting all these questions.
You're just lucky, Mark.
Yeah, I know. As far as evaluating experience, there are specific information in the criteria regarding what is to be done as far as evaluating that experience. Item number 5F in the criteria, in regard to experience, it says documentation in the form of reports, certifications, or file memoranda, or if such reports and memoranda are unavailable for good cause, other evidence at the credentialing authority's discretion that the work is compliant with USPAP must be provided as part of the state's experience verification process to support evidence claim. That's the criteria regarding what's the responsibility of the regulatory agencies for review. In my personal view, the issue, I've heard of some jurisdictions pulling work files. I've heard some that are requiring the candidates for licensure to come before the board and be interviewed. There's things that are at the discretion of the regulating body, but at the core of it is minimal USPAP compliance, and USPAP compliance is the basis. Looking through USPAP, it's not really difficult to comply with minimal USPAP standards. There are a lot of assignment specific elements of generating a credible appraisal report that is kind of left in the eye of the beholder. But minimal criteria is not real difficult to establish. So what I would encourage and these regulators to do, and this is just encouragement, is to stick with that minimum standard of USPAP and try not to impose this is what I would do as a board member in that situation. I would select different comps. I would adjust with different intensity. I might have gone into more detail here or there. I might have supported that a little differently. That becomes kind of in the eye of the beholder. We've had folks come into the system, they've completed their qualifying education, they've completed right now the supervisor trainee model. They've done all that, they're ready to go, they've passed their exam. In my view, they ought to be ready to go and hit the street. So that's my take.
Thank you. We have one more question. Would the AQB consider different experience hours? For example, a broker in California must have experience as prescribed number of years as a sales agent, but they will grant a small percentage of experience time for home inspectors and appraisers or the like.
Yeah, this has come up before. And it was, back when we adjusted the education requirements for CR and LR, this was a big deal about can you get some of this stuff from practical in other professions, and the list of other professions that might have applicable experience to appraisal began to grow substantially, and it was kind of never an end to it. But under the criteria, experience has got to come in the appraisal process. So that is, the appraisal process is defining the problem, gathering and analyzing data, applying the appropriate analysis and methodology, and arriving at an opinion of incorrectly reporting the opinion in compliance with USPAP. The other issue that is kind of a companion there is that log has to be filled out if you're running the supervisor trainee model. And do I think there's some room here for maybe future folks to take a look at? Sure. We continually get the question regarding doing just data collection without a specific subject property. That why can't that be a part of appraisal experience? And I hear you. The problem becomes is how to verify that and how to validate that. And so we haven't quite gotten over that issue yet. as far as an AQB, but we are well aware that that is out there, inspecting properties, maybe in a hybrid situation, is certainly out there. We're well aware of that, but we're trying to find something that is enforceable.
Another question is that regulators seem to be stringent in the examination of work experience. Will the AQB be issuing more specific criteria that regulators could use to avoid being excessively meticulous?
I doubt it. What I think is going to happen is that we are going to come out with this interpretation that says it's up to the regulators to validate that experience. And how you validate that experience, in my view, just needs to be equitable. So if you're going to extensively examine one trainee, then you need to be extensively examining all trainees, and make that very uniform in how you apply that. And that's my opinion. That it's not AQB's opinion, but I think we will come out with an interpretation about saying that you need to validate it somehow. And the jurisdictions will have great latitude in how they do that. But yeah, it does kind of, I see this information that comes through my email from trainees moving through various states and the issues that they have, and things come up, and I understand that I'm only getting one side of that issue. And I'm not hearing from the regulator side of it. And there may be a very valid reason why those trainees are being put through the ringer. And they may be well justified in that. But it seems to be a lot of them. And so I would just highly encourage you, if you have a policy in place of how you're going to run the validation of experience, that you do it uniformly.
Thank you. It's often been heard that work samples submitted to document a trainee's experience aren't so much a demonstration of their work ability as it is of the supervisors. And it's unlikely that a supervisor would actually send the state work examples that haven't already been reviewed thoroughly. This isn't an issue with PIREA, but how can this be countered for the traditional training model?
In my view, it can't. I've got a trainee, I've had trainees, and I can tell you from just a practical standpoint, if I have to sign that report with the trainee, it's my work, because I understand that it's my rear end in the sling, in other words. So every time that I put out a report, I've looked at it, I've reviewed it. So if there is a problem that the regulators are pulling, that looks bad on me as a supervisor, and not necessarily the trainee. So yeah, it's a problem. It's gonna be a problem under that supervisor trainee model, because that supervisor is signing off on everything that trainee does. That's the beauty part of the PIREA model, is that will be the trainees' work themselves. And it will have a mentor there evaluating that work, and they will have to be completing that work by themselves. So that's one of the advantages there of the PIREA program. So I don't think we're ever going to fix the supervisor trainee model where, what you're reviewing from a regulator standpoint for folks that are coming through with a traditional log. Even if you're selecting, as a regulator, you're selecting 3, 4, 5 appraisals off the log, it's still going to be that supervisor's work and not the trainee's work.
Okay. Can you tell us what is meant by appraisal consulting in the RPAQC, since it was removed from USPAP?
Finally, Wayne gets to answer a question.
Well, the RPAQC is still your world, Mark.
I don't want it. I don't want the consulting end of it. No.
There is a related question to this, Mark, and it has to do with appraisal review experience. So I get, in the larger view here, I guess the question becomes, could a state include valuation services that may not be an appraisal or an appraisal review, as long as they are completed in accordance with USPAP and there is an opinion that is well developed and credible and reasonable and conveyed to a client, which seems that yes, a state would have that capability. And some states do count review experience. Some states will allow 100% of a trainee's experience to be appraisal review, and other states either limit it or don't allow review experience to count. There's the criteria, as I know it to be, at least as it was when I was on the AQB, certainly does not prohibit the appraisal review experience from being used toward licensure or certification.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, we're back to, section 5B of what is experience, and it's in the appraisal practice. So if it's a function of appraisal practice that you can fit in there, I would think it would count.
There's a comment, not necessarily a question, that says paragraph V.E states, an hour of experience is defined as verifiable time spent in performing tasks in accordance with acceptable appraisal practice. And real property appraisal practice for experience credit includes appraisal review, consulting, and mass appraisals.
Very good. Thank you, Dennis.
Yeah.
You're quicker on your feet than I am.
Well, we have 20 minutes that we could still talk if anybody had any questions. If you don't want to put your question in to everyone, you can direct message me and I'll ask it for you without calling you out, or you can raise your hand. And while we wait to see if there's any more questions, does Dave, Wayne, or Mark have anything that they'd like to say off the cuff?
I just thank Mark for being here today.
Thanks a lot. I would say that the folks that are serving on these boards, I mean, especially last year and this year, AQB it's absorbed a considerable amount of time, especially as COVID began to come in and we began to pivot a little bit. And those board members are doing a tremendous job. I've got board members that are split out by tasks, and they are all operating and executing those tasks just really, really well. And so I can't compliment them enough.
So if your question wasn't answered to your liking or in full, you can send me an email or you can reach out to the Appraisal Foundation. The next session starts at 3:15 Eastern time. So in about 30 minutes from now. There is a new link, so please make sure that you haven't registered, that you register so you can get the link to log in. Thank you everyone for attending this session. We look forward to you joining us for the rest of the conference.
Hi, everybody.
I know.
Thanks.